He seemed to have demons of his own. He struggled to contain. He was losing.
Bradley Ellis.
Yeah.
You've had a lot going on. You've both been issuing out justice at jury duty,
True.
and you've been slaying all sorts of monsters in Diablo II Resurrected. And what we kind of thought it'd be fun to sit down because this is your first time going through Diablo 2.
True, yeah.
You've played Diablo 3, but you came into Diablo 2, you played through all 5 of the acts. And yeah, I guess big picture, what did you think? This game has a lot of... it's considered a true classic.
One of the greats, if I'm not mistaken, also.
One of the greats, yeah.
Yes.
yeah.
Funny that you said justice also, because I played as a paladin.
Nice.
So I was delivering justice upon filthy demons.
Did you do kind of your own build? Did you do like a hammered in? Or?
I did my own build for a little bit, then I was like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
Yeah.
So I looked it up, and people were like, try hammered in. I was like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So yeah. Diablo 2. Okay, this is a game I knew a lot of my friends played growing up. I didn't have a PC till I was like a senior in high school though, so I missed the boat. That was like late. That was like mid-2000s. So I missed the boat on this game a lot. I know a lot of people loved it, like you guys, you and Ben, or you, Huber loved Diablo 2, and I was like, all right, perfect opportunity to get in there. I played Diablo 3 also for a little context, just the base game though, but when I hopped in here, I was like, I get why people really like this game.
Okay, nice. And did that realization, because Diablo 2, I think definitely kind of takes a while for you to have that moment where it's like, oh, okay, I get why this is good, because I think you have to kind of like build up your character, kind of get your kit.
Right.
So you
it's
can...
super, like, you start super simple, and I would say even by the end of the game, I'm only doing like one attack kind of thing.
Yeah.
I haven't played Diablo 3 in a long time, but I remember you could like kind of switch abilities in and out pretty easily. And in this, it's like, no, you're pretty committed to what you do here.
Right. You were playing with mouse and keyboard?
Yes,
okay.
I was.
Yeah. So was that too limited to you? I guess maybe the more relevant question is, outside of the visuals, I would say Diablo 2 Resurrected. It's pretty much the same game. So you're really getting, I think, a very authentic experience. Did it feel old to you?
In some ways, I guess. Just like, I'm sure this is not for everybody, but in my experience, I only beat the game on normal, so I don't know like how it gets further on the other difficulties. It felt kind of old in how like the interface was and setting things up, like your key commands. Like you have 2 abilities on. Of course you can hotkey them, but just like the way it looked, I was like confused at first how to set things up. I definitely had to take my time and kind of figure things out, which is totally fine. But it felt kind of old in that sense. Like some of the enemy design felt kind of old. The encounters, where I was like, "This is pretty basic." There's like this enemy that reses guys back.
Yeah,
and it's like that's a constant thing throughout the whole game, pretty much. But it kind of didn't really matter to me, just because one thing for me, this world was just so enthralling to me. I was so drawn into this world. And I remember when Diablo 3 came out, and people were pissed about the visuals. Because it didn't seem as dark from what I remember people were complaining about.
Yeah, it just didn't have the grime.
Yeah, this has a lot of grime and like really fucked up kind of imagery.
Yeah, especially when you get into like some of the like dungeony areas.
It's like, this is a pretty gory game. So I was like, man, I really love this. Yeah, I really love this.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. I think the atmosphere is just so good, and I think because the acts change so much visually,
oh my god,
as you're going through them, I think that is a big part of it as well. Something else that I want to touch on, I think that is very different from, say, Diablo 3, is like Diablo 3 on normal is like, I feel like you can do anything and you never die.
Yeah.
Whereas Diablo 2, you kind of have short difficulty spikes.
Yes.
Like when you think of Duriel.
Is that the Act 2 guy?
Yeah, that's the Act 2 guy.
I remember that guy.
Right, being locked in that tiny room.
Yes.
Yeah. Was the challenge, I guess, like appropriate?
I would say the challenge definitely felt like an old game when you were talking about like that difficulty spike where it just kind of come out of nowhere. And I was like, oh yes, this reminds me of old games. It seems like games are more often tuned to be a more frequent throughout. Like there's not as much rapid like changing and difficulties. And it was definitely that in D2. But once I kind of figured out what I was doing and I investigated things, I was like, oh, okay, I can get through this kind of thing. But I definitely had to dig deep and figure out some stuff.
Yeah, and that's actually something I really like about D2 is like there's definitely tricks that you can do, you know, getting good at like porting out of a situation, making sure you always have stamina potions with you, just kind of things that you learn. How did you feel about the loot and managing that stuff? Did you feel like you were getting sufficient upgrades?
I got decent upgrades, but then once I discovered like runes and how they really worked, I used like this one rune set throughout my entire normal playthrough, and I looked it up and people were saying it's pretty normal. I was like, oh, okay, like I wasn't upgrading as much as I thought I would be.
Sure.
Because my build, like, you know, I was playing this game and I was expecting to auto attack quite a bit, and it's like at a point in the game I was not auto attacking at all.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I was just literally just using my ability the whole time, and it really caught me off guard, not in a bad way, but I was just kind of like surprised because I came from D3 and like I played D3 a long time ago, so I could be remembering things wrong, but I remember like it not being as just like this one kind of ability. And like when I played D3, I was not an expert. I was a total novice. I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah, when I think about D, I do think that you're right in the sense that like D2, you kind of like are building in a very specific way where it's like this is going to be like the primary thing that I do. And in D3, it's more like I'm going to do a broader range of things, but I'm going to kind of repeat that forever. It's more of like it's almost more like a rotation, I would say, in Diablo 3.
I would say so too, yeah. And like the gear progression, I would keep things for a long time, but when I would get something sweet, I was like, oh yeah, this feels real good. Like it felt real good to get loot in this game. I never like got grinding for loot in games like this all the time. I was like, yeah, it's fine, but like going on other difficulties. But when I beat this game, I was like, dude, I want to play a new character now, and I just want to see how this new character. I made a necromancer. And I was like, dude, this is really fun. This is super different than the paladin. I really like this.
Necromancer is my favorite class.
It's
in Diablo. I was gonna say Diablo 2, but in all of Diablo.
I could totally understand that. Like, I loved the necromancer. I'm like, oh, this is sick.
Yeah, there's just something about creating a murder army that I think
like
is
a skeleton and a golem. Like, this rules. I love this.
Definitely. And that is something that I think Diablo 2 does such a good job of, and I think you're very correct in saying that, you know, you're more focused in your abilities, but what you're focusing on is just super sick, right? So like being a paladin and having magical hammers spin around you, or being a druid and transforming into a beast, or being a necromancer. Like in terms of power fantasy, I think it
it's like I wasn't doing like a ton of different attacks, but what I was doing was still fun to do. It was still like I never got bored of just throwing hammers and killing a bunch of demons. I was always into it. I was just having a good time. And the DLC, like, well, because I didn't play the original, so I guess the visuals of this game, I hopped back and forth between the visuals whenever I'd get to a new area just to compare it. It's like, man, it's crazy.
Yeah.
What they've done.
I mean, that's always kind of the case when you have games where you can switch back and forth, where it's like, oh my gosh, what a transformation. I think I've never felt it as extremely as Diablo 2 Resurrected.
Insane.
Where you're like,
because like, I remember a Master Chief Collection. I was like, oh yeah, it looks pretty similar, but like this was crazy different.
It's a whole different level,
And the cutscenes of this game were so sick.
Yeah, that was actually something that I wanted to touch on, because I think the story is actually really cool, but you know, it's told pretty sparsely.
It is.
And it's just like clicking on a character and then, you know, them going through their text box. Was it still effective for you?
Yeah.
I do think the cutscenes are
because I was like into the lore of this universe.
Yeah,
I wanted to learn what was going on, what's going on with the Wanderer and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think Diablo 2 strikes a nice balance between being developed and being rich, but not being like overly complicated.
Yeah.
Like what's going on isn't that convoluted.
Yeah. It's like the depth, I would say, is in the character builds and what you can
Yeah.
do. Because I looked up character builds after this, like just what everyone does with these classes. I'm like, man, I mean, because this game's super old, you know? It's
Yeah.
like, when would this come out? 2000? I think 2000 or something?
2001.
So
I
it's
want
like
to
20
say.
years old.
Yeah.
And it's still a super popular game with a lot of people, you know, diehard fan
Definitely.
base. So it's just really sick seeing, because I have the luxury of coming in this when this game is pretty much solved at this point.
Yeah.
And just seeing all these crazy things people have figured out about it, like stuff I would never even think of.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean it was also a different time, but
Yeah.
we talk about at Easy Allies, you know, how many games that there are, and
Mm-hmm.
and it feels like even if a game is like really good or even exceptional, kind of the shelf life for 95% of games is like you get a month at most,
Yeah.
whereas like Diablo 2 has kind of had this ever long life. It just people always come back to it, or there's always some sort of dedicated community around it. And yeah, it's really neat. I think to see a whole
Yeah.
new audience.
I
into
was
it.
really happy with this this version of the game.
Cool.
You know, it gave me a newcomer like me a good access to it to learn to appreciate things about it. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't play the original release. I don't know how much was changed. I mean, obviously visually, it was
Yeah.
a lot more easy to get into.
And that's why I think it's so cool that you can switch it back.
Yeah.
If you you know, just anywhere. If
But
you
it's
want.
like, man, I get it. I get why people love this game. I get why people cite this as one of the greatest games of all time. Why it's inspired games like Path of Exile and
Yeah.
stuff like that. I'm like,
Definitely.
man, this was. If I was like there at the
Mm-hmm.
time, especially, it would have been even insane. But me coming back to it like 20 years after it's been out, I'm like still super into it.
Yeah, if you get a chance, since you're so fresh off of Diablo 2, definitely dive back into Path of Exile, and you'll feel the
I feel
Diablo
like-
2
yeah.
in a way that
And
maybe
I
you
feel
couldn't
like
before.
I would just understand the game better now.
Sure,
after
yeah.
coming through it. 'Cause
Definitely. I think that's
ARPGs
totally
have
true.
always been kind of confusing and overwhelming to me because I haven't played a ton of them. But
Yeah, and I think they are confusing and overwhelming for sure. I think that's a very accurate statement, but kind of the trade-off, right, is that once you kind of cross that hill, you reach a really nice level
yeah,
of satisfaction.
that's what it was.
Yeah.
It was like a steep hill, and I definitely had to work my way up it. But once I got there, it was real nice.
And it's so funny comparing it to Diablo 3 because I think Diablo 3 is good in a totally different way. Where like when I play Diablo 3, it's like, okay, I'm just not going to think at all, right? It's just kind of like a very mindless, like even at higher difficulties, it's just like a very constant, like bam, 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 bam. Whereas I think like Diablo 2 or Path of Exile, you really have to kind of plan things out, think about your character.
It's definitely a slower pace.
Yeah, it's definitely
Well,
slower
it's like
pace.
I don't have a problem with either, but it's like I did definitely notice that where
Yeah.
I was taking my time a little bit more. If I pulled too much, I would just die like bloop,
Right,
dead.
yeah.
Dead in a second.
Yeah, that's why I would love to do a hardcore stream with you and other allies, just to have that moment of like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
dead. I guess to wrap it up, fundamentally, you know, I just mentioned that Diablo 2 is such a different game than Diablo 3. How did you feel about like managing potions? How did you feel about the stamina system?
So at first I was like, man, this is super annoying. Like I'm tired of managing all this stuff. But once I just kind of got more comfortable with things,
Right.
it became second nature to me.
yeah,
Or it wasn't an issue at all.
Yeah, you're right. You do just get comfortable with it, and I think it can. There is a cumbersomeness to it,
Yeah.
but I love having to make decisions with your inventory like that, where it's like, okay,
Definitely a
what
lot
do
of
I
that.
want here? You know, I'm about to go out. Like, what do I need to make sure I have with me? How much? All that stuff. And so I just appreciate those kinds of
It
decisions.
definitely did make me think about what I'm bringing and what I'm picking up the
Yeah.
entire time.
Cool. Man, I have not had any time for Diablo 2 Resurrected, and much like you did with Lost Judgment on Frame Trap, you're getting me excited. I can definitely feel your enthusiasm, and I think it's just so heartwarming, I guess, that the game is so old, right? 20 years old, and you are able to come to it after all this time and go like, I get it. I really, really, really get it. And
Yeah.
I think that's so rad. But thank you, Brad, for
Oh
sitting
yeah,
down with
thanks
me,
for
man.
talking about it with me.
Cool.
Why did I follow him? I don't know. know. Why do things happen as they do in dreams? All I know is that when he beckoned, I had to follow him. And from that moment, we traveled together, east, always.